The Galactic Combat Academy was the pinnacle of martial training. It produced the finest warriors in the galaxy, elite soldiers, commanders, and personal guards for the highest-ranking officials. Its instructors were legends. Some were war heroes. Others were genetically engineered to perfection. And then there was Instructor Varkesh. Varkesh was not just an instructor, he was the instructor. A towering four-armed Cathari with centuries of battle experience, he had trained champions, survived wars, and crushed rebellions. His mere presence commanded respect. His word was law. He had taught countless species, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. The reptilian Drask, known for their brutal strength, the swift and cunning Zalari, whose reflexes were unmatched, even the cybernetically enhanced Vexari, whose bodies were more machine than flesh. But today, he faced an oddity, a single human cadet. The Galactic Council had recently granted humanity limited access to the Academy, though most instructors dismissed them as unimpressive, too fragile, too weak, too ordinary. Varkesh agreed. He had seen human soldiers in battle, resilient perhaps, but nowhere near the best. Still, a cadet was a cadet. And this one, a young man named Lieutenant James Carter, stood before him now, thin by galactic standards. Only 2 arms, a single heart. No claws, no natural armor, no cybernetics. His kind should have never made it this far. Varkesh smirked, his tusks glinting. "This will be a short lesson, human," he growled. "You will learn why you do not belong here." James didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head, as if trying to understand why he was being underestimated. Varkesh gestured to the sparring ring. "Pick a weapon," he said, expecting the human to fumble with the selection. James walked past plasma blades, energy whips, and high-tech gauntlets. He ignored the Cathari battle axe and the Zalari shockstaff. Instead, he reached for something ancient, something simple, a sword. Varkesh laughed, a deep guttural sound that echoed through the training hall. A blade? How primitive. James merely smiled, rolling his shoulders as he stepped into the ring. Varkesh's amusement faded. Something about that smile unsettled him. For the first time in centuries, the instructor hesitated. The training hall of the Galactic Combat Academy was vast, designed to accommodate warriors of all species. The air smelled of scorched metal and sweat, the walls scarred from centuries of combat practice. Every corner echoed with the sounds of training, grunts of effort, the hum of plasma weapons, and the dull thud of bodies hitting the floor. At the center stood Instructor Varkesh, a legend in his own right. He was massive, even by Cathari standards. 8 feet tall, 4 muscular arms, and a hide as tough as starship plating. His gaze swept over the assembled cadets, his tusked mouth curling into a smirk. Today was different. Today, the Academy welcomed its first human combatant. The doors hissed open, and Lieutenant James Carter stepped inside. He was underwhelming. Varkesh's eyes narrowed as he studied the newcomer. Humans were rumored to be unpredictable, but this one, he looked utterly average. No claws, no armored plating, no visible cybernetic enhancements. Just a lean, compact frame wrapped in a standard-issue combat uniform. A whisper ran through the ranks of cadets, some of them chuckling. The Drask, massive reptilian brutes, exchanged amused glances. The Zalari, sleek and fast, assessed him with cold curiosity. The Vexari, cybernetically enhanced warriors, barely spared him a glance. Varkesh crossed his arms. "So, this is humanity's finest?" James didn't react. He merely stepped forward, his posture relaxed. Not arrogant, not afraid. Just, "I calm," Varkesh growled. "I hope you understand, human, that the Galactic Combat Academy is no place for fragile creatures. Strength rules here. If you cannot keep up, you will be discarded." James tilted his head slightly. "Then I guess I'll have to keep up." The response was quiet, almost casual. But something in the way he said it made even the most hardened warriors pause. Varkesh scowled. He had seen this kind of arrogance before, from young warriors who thought they were invincible. It always ended the same way: step into the ring. The other cadets grinned, eager to witness the inevitable. James moved toward the weapons rack, where an assortment of deadly tools awaited. Plasma blades, energy spears, shock gauntlets, and the infamous Cathari war axe. Any sane warrior would choose something advanced. James reached past them all. His fingers closed around a sword, a simple, solid metal blade. No energy field, no enhancements, just forged steel. Laughter erupted from the spectators. One of the Drask slapped his tail against the floor in amusement. Even the Vexari, usually emotionless, emitted a mechanical chuckle. Varkesh bared his fangs. A sword? Do you think this is some ancient battlefield, human? You insult this institution. James stepped into the ring, rolling his shoulders. I like to keep things simple, Varkesh sneered. Very well. He selected 2 shock batons, weapons designed to incapacitate with every strike. He activated them with a crackling hum and stepped forward. The training hall grew silent. James exhaled slowly, shifting his stance. The fight began. The air in the training hall grew thick with anticipation. Every cadet leaned forward, eager to witness the inevitable humiliation of the human. Varkesh towered over James, his twin shock batons crackling with raw energy. His movements were confident, controlled, those of a seasoned warrior who had bestead countless opponents. James, by contrast, remained still. His sword, a simple steel blade, rested lightly in his grip. No glowing edges, no plasma charge, just cold, sharpened metal. Varkesh sneered. I will make this quick, human. Then he lunged, a blur of motion. 8 feet of Cathari muscle, moving with terrifying speed. His first baton streaked toward James's ribs, crackling with enough voltage to send a Drask into convulsions. It never connected. James wasn't there anymore. The human twisted, sidestepping with a movement so fluid, it looked effortless. The baton hummed through empty air. Varkesh's second arm swung downward, aiming for James's exposed shoulder. Another miss. James was gone again, slipping just out of reach, always a fraction of a second ahead. The crowd's laughter faded. The amusement turned to quiet disbelief. Varkesh snarled, pressing the attack. He struck faster, combinations designed to overwhelm, to break the rhythm of an opponent. Left baton, right baton, downward strike, each one carrying enough force to shatter bone, but nothing landed. James moved like water, weaving through the storm of attacks with precision, not a single wasted motion, not a single step too far. Then he countered, a flicker of silver. James's sword snapped forward, too fast for the eye to follow. The ringing clash of steel against baton filled the air. Sparks flew. Varkesh stumbled back. It wasn't a deep strike, but it was enough. The first clean hit. Murmurs rippled through the gathered cadets. Varkesh's nostrils flared. He roared and lunged, batons swinging like twin thunderbolts. He was done playing. James didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped in. The sudden aggression caught Varkesh off guard. His batons, meant to strike an opponent at mid-range, were suddenly too close, too cramped. James twisted his sword, locking one baton against the blade. With a sharp movement, he wrenched it aside. The second baton came down. James caught Varkesh's wrist with his free hand, redirecting the blow. Then he drove his knee into the Cathari's ribs. A deep, painful thud. Varkesh gasped, staggering back. He had never been struck like that before. James didn't stop. He pivoted, blade sweeping low. The flat of the sword struck the back of Varkesh's knee. A perfectly placed strike, not meant to kill, but to break balance. The unthinkable happened. Varkesh fell. The hall fell deathly silent. A Cathari, a legendary combat instructor. On the ground, James stood over him, sword held steady, tip hovering just inches from Varkesh's throat. The fight was over. Varkesh panted, his forearms bracing against the floor. He looked up at the human, disbelief in his reptilian eyes. James met his gaze, no gloating, no arrogance, just calm certainty. "I kept up," he said simply. The silence stretched. Then somewhere in the back a cadet clapped. It was hesitant at first, unsure. Then another joined in, and another. The sound grew, an uneasy, reluctant respect spreading through the room. Varkesh exhaled and with a deep growl pushed himself to his feet. He met James's gaze, eyes burning with something unreadable. Then slowly he extended one of his four hands. James looked at it for a moment, then clasped it firmly. Varkesh's grip tightened. "You are not what I expected, human." James smirked. "I get that a lot." The legend had begun. Varkesh stood tall, his bruised ribs and shaken pride hidden beneath a rigid, disciplined stance. The combat hall still buzzed with the murmurs of stunned cadets, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. A human. A mere human had not only fought him but had defeated him in a controlled sparring match. It was unacceptable. Varkesh clenched his fists. His years as the Academy's elite combat instructor had forged him into an unshakable warrior, a force of discipline and power. Every species under the Dominion had trained beneath him, and yet James Walker had bested him. Not through brute strength, not through overwhelming speed, through flawless control. Varkesh refused to let it stand. He turned to face the cadets, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. "That was a sparring match," he declared, "a test of skill, not true battle." A flicker of hope crossed the faces of his students. Yes, they thought, that was just a training bout, a fluke. Varkesh pointed at James. "Human!" James arched a brow, still casually resting his sword against his shoulder. "Yeah, we will fight again." Varkesh's slit pupils narrowed. "No restrictions, no limits. You will see what it means to challenge a true warrior." A ripple of anticipation swept through the hall. This was no longer about training. This was a duel. James tilted his head, considering. Then he smiled. "All right." He stepped forward, rolling his shoulders. "Same weapons?" Varkesh shook his head. He turned toward the weapons rack, selecting his true armaments. The twin shock batons were formidable, but they were tools of instruction. For real combat, the Cathari wielded something else. He reached for two massive curved blades, each one nearly as long as a human's arm, forged from the near-indestructible metal of his homeworld. James let out a low whistle. "Fancy." Varkesh turned, gripping his weapons. "And you?" James rolled his wrist, adjusting his grip on his single steel blade. "This'll do." Varkesh bared his fangs. "Then prepare yourself." The moment the signal was given, Varkesh exploded. Forward, no test, no patience. This was war. He struck with both blades in a brutal, scissoring arc, aiming to cleave James in two. James ducked low, rolling beneath the strike. He felt the air shift as the blades sliced inches above his head. Varkesh pivoted mid-swing, bringing one blade down like an executioner's axe. James twisted, sword flashing up. Steel met alien metal with a ringing clash. Sparks flew. The force of the strike sent James skidding backward, but he stayed on his feet. The watching cadets held their breath. This was nothing like the controlled spar before. Every movement was faster, sharper, lethal. Varkesh pressed forward, his forearms a relentless storm of slashing blades. He fought like a whirlwind, every strike aimed to kill, and still James dodged. Still James blocked. Varkesh snarled, adjusting his attack. He feinted with one blade. James moved to counter. Then the second blade arced in from below. A killing stroke. But James was already moving. With a sudden, impossible burst of speed, he sidestepped and twisted his sword to deflect. Varkesh's strike missed by a fraction of an inch. The cadets gasped. The duel had been going for minutes now, but James showed no sign of slowing. His breath was steady. his footwork flawless. Varkesh felt something he had not felt in decades. Frustration. James wasn't fighting like a soldier, he wasn't even fighting like a duelist. His movements were too natural, too fluid, adapting mid-motion, flowing between offense and defense like a dance. Varkesh had fought warriors of every species. He had trained against artificial intelligence simulations, against the Dominion's finest gladiators. None of them fought like this. With a growl, he shifted tactics. Instead of raw aggression, he moved with precision, cutting off James's movement, forcing the human into disadvantageous positions. James responded immediately, shifting his stance, adjusting, but Varkesh was faster now. A blade nicked James's arm. A shallow cut, but the first blood drawn. The watching cadets cheered. Finally, their instructor had the advantage, but then James smiled. Varkesh barely had time to react before James stepped in. Not away, not to the side, closer. He ducked inside Varkesh's guard, too close for the larger warrior to use his blades effectively. A sudden elbow strike slammed into Varkesh's ribs. Pain exploded through his side. Before he could recover, James twisted his sword, not in a lethal strike, but in a controlled, precise movement. With a sudden, sharp crack, Varkesh's left blade was sent spinning from his grasp. The crowd gasped. Varkesh staggered, eyes wide. James pressed the attack. For the first time, he was on the offensive. A flurry of movements, his sword striking not to kill, but to disarm, to control, to dominate the fight. A well-placed parry sent the second blade clattering to the ground. Varkesh lashed out with his remaining arms, attempting to grapple, but James was already gone, moving just out of reach. With a final decisive motion, James brought his sword up. The blade stopped just beneath Varkesh's chin. Silence. No one moved. Varkesh froze. His own hands were empty, his body ached, and above him James stood, calm, unwavering. For the second time that day, Varkesh had lost. James exhaled, lowering his sword. "I think that makes us even." Varkesh took a long, shuddering breath. His pride screamed for him to lash out, to refuse this reality. But he had always taught his cadets one thing: respect the battle. Respect the warrior. Slowly, he dropped to one knee. He bowed his head. The cadets gasped. The Cathari did not kneel lightly. "I yield," Varkesh said. His voice was steady. "Human, you have proven yourself beyond question." James blinked. Wasn't expecting that." Varkesh looked up, his gaze firm. "What are you, Walker?" James smirked. "A guy with a sword." A beat of silence. Then the room erupted. The cadets cheered, some pounding their fists against the walls, others shouting in sheer disbelief. James turned, sheathing his blade. He met Varkesh's gaze. "I think you and I are gonna get along just fine." Varkesh bared his fangs in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You are an anomaly, human." He pushed himself to his feet. "And anomalies change everything." James just shrugged. "Yeah, we do that." The legend of the human warrior had begun. The aftermath of the duel spread like wildfire. By the next morning, every cadet, officer, and instructor at the Dominion Combat Academy had heard the tale. A human defeated instructor Varkesh twice. Some refused to believe it. Others whispered in awe, but for those who had witnessed it firsthand, there was no denying the truth. James Walker was unlike anything they had ever seen. And now, the Academy's highest-ranking warriors wanted to see it for themselves. The challenge. The combat arena was packed. Cadets and officers lined the observation decks, murmuring among themselves. Even members of the High Command were present, their reptilian eyes locked onto the center of the ring. At its heart stood Varkesh, his honor on the line once more. Across from him, James stretched his shoulders, looking almost bored. "You sure about this?" he asked, rolling his wrist. Varkesh growled. "I was overconfident before. I held back. That will not happen again." James chuckled. "Good. Holding back is boring." The duel was about to begin when a third figure stepped into the ring. The murmurs turned into full-blown gasps. Grand Warlord Kortak, the highest combat instructor in the entire Dominion. A legend, the only warrior to have bested Varkesh in single combat. Varkesh turned sharply. "Warlord, Kortak raised a hand, silencing him. His piercing gaze locked onto James. "Human," he rumbled, his deep voice like rolling thunder. "I have seen the recordings. I have heard the accounts. They say you fight like no other." James shrugged. "Guess so." Kortak's forearms crossed. "Then I will see it for myself." A stunned silence filled the arena. Varkesh stepped back, his throat tightening. "You mean to—" Kortak's gaze never left James. "Yes." The crowd erupted in disbelief. This wasn't just a duel anymore. This was a test of human limits. James sighed. "Man, I was hoping for lunch first." Kortak simply drew his weapon, a single curved energy blade that hummed with restrained power. James exhaled, rolling his neck. "All right then." He reached back, drawing his sword with a clean, fluid motion. The room fell silent. Then the signal was given. Kortak moved first. It was like being struck by a lightning bolt. One moment, he stood at the edge of the ring. The next, he was already within striking distance, his blade carving a blur of light toward James's chest. A lesser warrior would have been dead before realizing the fight had even begun. But James was already moving. He twisted to the side, just evading the strike, the humming blade slicing a mere hair's breadth from his ribs. Kortak wasted no time, his follow-up strike coming even faster. He aimed low, sweeping for James's legs. James jumped, an impossible split-second reaction, flipping mid-air over Kortak's strike and landing in a perfect roll. The audience barely had time to process what they were seeing. James was keeping up. Kortak was a warrior of legends, a fighter who had never been bested outside of war. And yet this human, this outsider, was matching him, move for move. James smirked. Not bad. Kortak's expression remained unreadable, but his next strike came even faster. The fight was beyond anything the Academy had ever seen. Where Varkesh had fought with precision, Kortak fought with power and speed in perfect harmony. He attacked with a grace that only centuries of experience could grant, his blade flowing like liquid light, each movement effortless yet utterly lethal. And James was matching it. Steel clashed against energy, sending bright sparks cascading across the floor. Kortak's attacks were relentless, but James wasn't just blocking. He was deflecting, redirecting, twisting every strike. Away at the last possible moment, cadets watching from the stands held their breath. They weren't just watching a duel, they were watching the impossible. James wasn't moving like any species they knew. He was adapting, adjusting mid-motion, predicting Kortak's moves a fraction of a second before they came. It wasn't instinct, it was something deeper. And then James attacked, a single strike, a perfectly timed counter. Kortak barely had time to react before James's sword struck his weapon at just the right angle, disrupting the energy field, causing it to flicker. The crowd gasped. No one had ever disrupted Kortak's blade before. No one had ever forced him to take a step back, and yet James had just done both with a single strike. Kortak's gaze sharpened. Then, for the first time in decades, he smiled. "You are a fascinating creature, human," he rumbled. James rolled his shoulders. "I get that a lot." Kortak deactivated his blade. "Enough. I've seen all I need to see." The duel was over. Not because James had won, not because Kortak had lost, but because the lesson was complete. Silence filled the arena. Then a roar of applause erupted from the stands. Cadets and officers alike pounded their fists, their voices echoing through the hall. Varkesh looked on, stunned. James sheathed his sword, turning to Kortak. "So, how'd I do?" Kortak studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slow nod, he said, "You should not be possible." James chuckled. "Yeah, well, humans have a habit of doing the impossible." Kortak turned to the assembled cadets. His voice boomed through the arena. "Let this be known. Humanity is not to be underestimated." The declaration sent a ripple through the crowd. The Dominion had always viewed humans as a lesser species, barely worthy of recognition. But today, that perception changed. Today, a single human had proven himself against their greatest warrior, and he had stood tall. James stretched. "Cool. Now can I get lunch?" The Grand Warlord chuckled, a rare sound from such a warrior. "You have earned it, human. You have earned far more than you know." As James walked off, the cadets stared at him in awe. They had come expecting a spectacle. Instead, they had witnessed the rise of something legendary, and none of them would ever look at a human the same way again. The academy halls buzzed with energy. The impossible had happened. Word of the duel spread beyond the Dominion Combat Academy, reaching the highest ranks of the Dominion military. A human had stood against Grand Warlord Kortak and lived, not just lived, matched him. The Dominion was a civilization built on strength, honor, and hierarchy. To challenge a warlord and hold one's ground, that was beyond rare. That was legendary. But for James Walker, it was just another Tuesday. Kortak's proclamation still rang in the cadets' ears. "Let this be known. Humanity is not to be underestimated." For centuries, the Dominion had dismissed humans. They were a young species, lacking the refined combat techniques of the elder races. Now, that illusion was shattered. James strolled through the training grounds, stretching his arms. He could feel eyes on him. Cadets whispered as he passed. Instructors, once dismissive, now studied him with wary respect. Even Varkesh, humiliated but wiser, regarded him with something bordering on admiration. But one person wasn't satisfied: Kortak himself. The Grand Warlord had watched the duel's recordings again and again, and there was something in the way James fought, something different, something alien. It wasn't just skill. It wasn't just instinct. It was adaptation. Kortak needed to know more, so he issued one final challenge. The sun burned high over the open-air combat grounds as the final duel was announced. This time, it wouldn't be in the arena. This time, it would take place in the Dread Circle, a combat pit reserved for only the most brutal tests of skill. The rules were simple: one warrior leaves standing. It was not a fight to the death, but neither warrior would hold back. James stood in the center of the pit, casually rolling his shoulders. Across from him, Kortak towered, his forearms folded. "You fight like nothing I've ever seen, human," Kortak rumbled. "You learn, you change, you adapt. But I must know, can you survive?" James exhaled. "Guess we're about to find out." The signal boomed. The final duel began. Kortak wasted no time. He launched forward, faster than any being of his size had any right to move. His upper left hand swung his energy blade in a diagonal slash. James ducked, but Kortak's lower right fist hammered into his ribs. Pain exploded through James's body as he skidded backward, barely keeping his footing. The crowd gasped. James groaned. "All right, that was a good one." Kortak didn't give him time to recover. He pressed forward, raining down attacks from all four arms at once. Any other warrior would have been overwhelmed. But James wasn't just any warrior. He saw the patterns, the rhythms, the openings. He leaned left, a blade barely missing his neck. He twisted right, a fist whiffing past his shoulder. His instincts, honed by thousands of years of human evolution, kicked in. James wasn't fighting on reaction. He was fighting on prediction. Then he made his move. Kortak swung downward with both blades. James stepped forward instead of back, an insane move. The blades missed by millimeters. Then James drove his elbow into Kortak's ribs with all his strength. A normal strike wouldn't have done much, but James had angled it perfectly, striking between the hardened plates of Kortak's armor, right at the vulnerable tissue underneath. Kortak grunted, stepping back. The audience gasped. No one had ever forced him back like that before. James smirked. "Gotcha." Kortak grinned. For the first time in decades, he felt alive. The battle continued, the duel that defied logic. The combat became a blur of motion. Kortak fought like a god of war, his blades slicing through the air like lightning. James moved like a shadow, slipping past attacks with impossible precision. Every strike Kortak made, James was already countering. Every move James made, Kortak adjusted to keep up. It wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a conversation, a dialogue written in steel, reflexes, and raw instinct. James saw it now. Why? Kortak had called him here? This wasn't just about victory. It was about learning. Kortak was testing not just James's strength, but his ability to grow. And James was thriving. Then the moment came. Kortak lunged, his blade flashing toward James's chest. James dropped to one knee at the last second, twisting his sword upward in a perfect parry. Kortak's blade flickered, disarmed. James spun, pressing his sword against Kortak's throat. Silence. Kortak's upper hands clenched into fists. His lower hands relaxed. James panted, keeping the blade steady. Then Kortak laughed, a deep, rolling belly laugh that echoed through the combat pit. James lowered his blade. "Something funny?" Kortak nodded. "You, human." He stepped back, raising all four hands. "I concede." The crowd roared. James had won. Kortak turned to the watching cadets. "This is what you must learn." His voice rang through the air. "Strength is more than power, more than skill. Strength is adaptation. It is evolution. It is knowing your opponent better than they know themselves." He pointed at James. "This human has shown us something greater than combat. He has shown us what it means to grow." James scratched the back of his head. "That's a lot of pressure, man," Kortak chuckled. "And yet you wear it well." Then, in a gesture that stunned every warrior present, Kortak bowed. A grand warlord of the Dominion had bowed to a human. James blinked. "Well, that's new," the cadets whispered among themselves. For centuries, the Dominion had believed themselves superior. They had looked down on humanity as weaker, lesser. But today, the most feared warrior in their ranks had acknowledged humanity's strength. The lesson was clear. James Walker wasn't just a warrior. He was a symbol. The fight was over. The legend had begun. The Dominion Combat Academy had seen its fair share of warriors rise and fall, but never before had it witnessed something like this. James Walker had done more than win a duel. He had rewritten expectations. His fight against Grand Warlord Kortak spread across the Dominion like wildfire. Instructors debated his techniques. Cadets whispered his name in hushed awe, and the High Command took notice. A human had matched a Grand Warlord. That was impossible until James Walker made it reality. James strolled through the Academy's halls, now a figure of legend. Cadets no longer scoffed at him. Instead, they watched him with wide-eyed curiosity, some even bowing their heads in silent respect. Varkesh, the once arrogant elite who had dismissed James, approached him one evening. "I was wrong about you, human," he admitted, his voice measured. "Your kind. You are dangerous. In ways I never imagined," James smirked. "Good. Maybe next time you'll think twice before underestimating us." Varkesh nodded. "Perhaps." Then, after a moment's hesitation, "Teach me." James raised an eyebrow. "Teach? You?" Varkesh exhaled sharply as if the words pained him. "Your way of fighting, your instincts, your ability to read the battle before it unfolds. I want to learn." James chuckled. Well, well, didn't expect that. He stretched his arms. All right, sure. First lesson, never fight fair. Varkesh blinked. That is dishonorable. James grinned. No, that's human. Meanwhile, Kortak sat in his chamber, reviewing the combat footage once again. James's movements were unlike any warrior he had ever faced. Not because of strength, not because of speed, but because of something far more dangerous. Human adaptability. Kortak made his decision. He activated his communicator, sending a priority message directly to the Dominion High Council. The humans are not to be underestimated. Their potential for growth, for adaptation, makes them the most dangerous warriors I have ever seen. I recommend a full reassessment of their combat capabilities, and I suggest we bring them into our ranks rather than against them. The response came quickly. Understood, Grand Warlord. Further evaluation will begin immediately. Kortak smiled. This was only the beginning. 3 days later, James Walker stood in front of a packed combat hall. Hundreds of cadets sat before him, warriors of all species, eager to learn. The Dominion Combat Academy had officially appointed him as its first ever human combat instructor. James crossed his arms, letting the silence hang for a moment. Then he grinned. All right, listen up. He took a step forward, his voice carrying across the hall. You all fight with tradition, honor, precision, and that's great. But if you really want to win a fight, his eyes gleamed. You fight like a human. The legend had begun.